welcome back everyone after the short break that we had. Sabhi se nivedan hai, we request everyone to quickly be seated. We are beginning with the final session for the day, and this is on the business models. In order to explore the transformative potential of distributed renewable energy in electricity generation and consumption, as well as impacting livelihoods and business practices, this session will gather industry leaders, policy makers, technology providers, and financiers to discuss crucial elements of successful business models. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with this. I'm sure this will really give us some important takeaways. The session will be chaired by Mr. R.S. Dhillon, former CMD of PFC. मैं निवेदन करना चाहूँगी Dhillon जी से कि प्लीज़ आप मंच पे पधारें. जोरदार तालियों के साथ आइए अभिनंदन करते हैं Mr. R.S. Dhillon, former CMD of PFC. And also joined by Mr. Saurabh Kumar, Vice President, India, GEAPP. Zordar taliyan Mr. Saurabh Kumar ke liye. Mr. Upendra Bhatt, co-founder and MD of cKinetics. And Mr. Sabyasachi Majumdar, Senior Director, Care Ratings. Kindly join hands as we welcome each of our speakers on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome each of our speakers, of course our chair as well. May I please request Mr. Dhillon to kindly please take over the proceedings of this session, which is going to be a very interesting one on business models. Let's begin.
So, a very good evening to all. Very good evening to all of you. Warm welcome to the last session, which is, I think, the most important one. Business models, including financing of DRE. In the earlier sessions, lot of emphasis was being given to financing of the various distributed RE projects. So we have talked about the sustainability, that the project should be sustainable. From the financing point of view, it should be a financial sustainable project which we have to finance. We have seen the importance in the earlier sessions of distributed RE to speed up energy transition, and then how climate change is very important. India is the third largest energy consumer in the world after US and China, and the per capita consumption is only 1/3 of the average of the world. And the demand for electricity is growing at 8%, which is the requirement as we are getting industrialized. And Viksit Bharat requirement is there, so the energy consumption is going to increase many folds. DRE makes sense as we are going to generate electricity at the closer to the consumers, and we do not need large transmission system, and the land requirement is also less in large renewable projects. We have seen that the land requirement is humongous, and we need a contiguous land area for putting up the solar plants and also the wind. Distributed renewable energy in the rural areas has a potential of additional income to the rural households. It will empower the marginalized sections, empower the women there, and it will help the industries in that area to get power on demand. The power requirement which they have presently is not being met. And there is tremendous potential for green energy, job creation, and this will limit the migration. So in India, we have many distributed renewable energy applications which are of mainstream, like solar lighting, solar water pumps, solar PV, mini micro hydels, etc. And there are applications also with respect to solar powered looms, oil extractors, cold storage, etc. So according to a recent study of CEW, there are 12 mature distributed renewable energy livelihoods technologies which have a collective potential to impact 37 million livelihoods, which is 3.7 crore livelihoods. And this has an impact of generating revenue opportunities worth US dollars 28 billion, around 41,000 crores. The investment requirement is tremendous. If you see the investment required for becoming net zero by 2070, it is to the tune of 10 to 15 trillion US dollars, which is almost 3 times the present GDP of the country. And whether we will be able to raise resources domestically, I think we have to see internationally to raise the resources for such large requirement. And in DRE, distributed renewable energy, the fund requirement from private sector will also be helpful. So DRE solutions can succeed when viable business models linked to livelihood creations are there. And we have several models such as which have been developed. So there is a need to identify the challenges which we face and accordingly recommend the policy changes which we require. The business models which we are talking about should be sustainable, and we have to basically scale up this and replicate in other states for its propagation. We will need local institutional support and financing from the local banks. Worldwide, we have seen that the initial projects, we need some kind of government support in form of subsidies. But once the pilot and demonstration projects have been established, the community and other stakeholders see the benefit of the project, and it can be replicated based on commercial principles. Normally, the subsidy which is being provided is result based, so we get the subsidy after the project is commissioned. So one view is that the subsidy should be made available upfront during the construction phase, and it will improve the ecosystem and faster implementation of the distributed renewable energy projects. Typically, banks and financial institutions have shied away from funding distributed renewable energy projects because these are small ticket projects, retail type of funding is required, and the lenders are looking at the bankability of the project, basically the financial sustainability. So PFC had also financed number of biomass projects, and we have learned the hard way that we have to secure the raw material for the biomass because the projects have a life of 25 years. So the raw material should be available for that life cycle. In such type of projects, the security is an issue. The assets cannot be placed, the land cannot be mortgaged. So we are looking at financial institutes have to look at assignment of the receivables from the project. The revenue stream has to be ensured, and the ways of securing that has to be identified. And as indicated in the last session also, it is a good idea to have energy efficiency component also in the DRE so that we have an increased revenue stream for servicing the debt. In respect of establishing the micro grid infrastructure, we can have a asset company who owns the asset, and for implementation we can have a EPC company, and then the asset is transferred back to the asset company, and we can have a service type of ESCOs which will be doing this job. For smaller projects, we can look at consumer finance, where the consumer can self-invest and partner with the local financial institution to bring in finance for the project. This will bring a sense of ownership and make sure that the plant, the operations is carried out in a better way and better synergies are there. And in this field, I think private players can pitch in. Aggregation and packaging of the schemes in form of larger projects for risk mitigation mechanisms can be seen, and also aggregation will help in larger scale for procurement and will lead to lower costs, as we have seen in ESL going in for LED bulbs, where the cost, which was 450 rupees, has come down to 65. And this was basically, we had a large requirement of the bulbs. The Government of India has been consistently supporting the DRE applications through various interventions. The off-grid and decentralized solar PV applications in one of the oldest programs, and the schemes like PM Kusum and Atal Jyoti Yojana have been the mainstay for the DRE applications. In the morning, we heard the Secretary Power mentioning the new interventions which Government of India is bringing in, which is PM Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, and he had also indicated that distributed RE purchase, power purchase obligation will trigger in by the next year, which will be initially 1.5% and then go on to 4.5%. This will, I think, a very big policy initiative to promote the distributed renewable energy. From financing perspective, we can consider various schemes for attracting capital, lowering the cost of funding. We have blended finance, deploying public and philanthropic funds, viability gap funding. CSR funding can be one of the routes for initially doing these such type of projects, and for part financing the structure for reducing the return thresholds. Credit enhancement schemes are there, partial credit guarantee, partial risk guarantee, and we can also tap in multilateral financial institutions for funding this type of projects. So we have eminent panelists over here, and initially we can go around, and each of the eminent panelists can speak for maybe 5 to 7 minutes about their views of financing distributed RE and sharing their experiences. So first of all, I would like to start with Mr. Saurabh, who is the Vice President of GEAPP. Over to you, Saurabh ji.
Thank you, Dhillon Saab. Let me first, at the outset, thank Power Foundation of India and CPI for inviting me. Extremely grateful. This is a very important subject, not just in India, but globally, and particularly we in GEAPP, which is largely a philanthropic organization, perhaps the largest philanthropy in the energy space in the world. And for us, DRE is one of the biggest priority along with battery energy storage. So let me just put some thoughts together, and maybe that will provoke a discussion, at least amongst us. What are the challenges? Let me first look at the potential that this country has on DRE. The rooftop space in India can have more than 650 gigawatt of renewables. That's number one. Number two, the agriculture grid needs 150 gigawatts of decentralized renewables, basically the PM Kusum that the chair referred to. And I can go on and on other applications, particularly interconnected mini grids. The question is, why does it not happen? Is it because of lack of credit, or is it lack of equipment at the right price? I think the problem lies somewhere else. Let's pick up rooftop. Why has rooftop 40 gigawatt has not worked till now, and what is it that the new scheme that has been announced wants to do better so that this time it takes off? And the simple thing is, the transaction costs are just too high for a household to really go and there are multiple inspections, there are multiple approvals that you need to take. You may not necessarily be interested in getting a 5 kilowatt system, because the cost at which it will come to you may not make sense for most of the households who don't have consumption beyond 300 units, simply because the tariff that you will have to pay is much more than that. Look at agriculture. And again, here, it's not the subsidy, it's not just maybe making policy requirements that have worked. Again, I give the example of PM Kusum, launched 7 years ago with a 25 gigawatt of target, with a $4 billion capital subsidy behind it, 34,000 crores. Look at where we are. Not more than a gigawatt has been grounded. And I'm very proud to say that of that, about 300 megawatt was done by EESL as a model. And therefore, what is it that we need to do to really develop first a project and then a business case? So what we did in ESL is that we started to aggregate land parcels, create a project which then turns around from a distributed renewable to a utility scale. So we started doing tenders for 100 megawatt. We got a tariff of 3 rupees per unit, which is almost equal to what we are getting in the utility scale. So I think what is needed is basically develop the institutional capacity at the DISCOM level. And that's precisely what we are doing in 2 states. In the last 3 or 4 months, we have aggregated agriculture projects of more than 250 megawatt in the state of Maharashtra and Orissa. They are all out in bidding. Similarly, for SMEs, in Maharashtra, in about 3 clusters, almost 100 megawatt of rooftop solar has been aggregated, will be put out for bidding very, very soon. We want to take Maharashtra to a 1 gigawatt journey in DRE in a year, in 2024 itself. And they are targeting about 6 gigawatts of DRE only by 2030. We want to replicate this in other states as we go ahead. I still feel creating this aggregated pool of projects, then inviting developers who are so far not looking at the DRE space at all. I mean, I'm talking about Tata's, Adani's, who are big in, or Renews of this world. So that's our aim. And I think things like the National Solar Rooftop Scheme that has been announced will only increase the attractiveness of RE as a resource, DRE as a resource, which I think is greatly needed for this country to transition to low fossil fuel energy sources. So let me stop here, Mr. Chairman, and I'll come back.
So over to Upendra Bhatt ji for his opening remarks.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Power Foundation India and Climate Policy Initiative for having me over. This is an area in which we have been working very, very closely for over 14 years. I remember when the National Solar Mission was launched, I had presented a paper on the role and opportunity for DRE. And I think we have had several lessons through the 15 years, but I don't think the space has moved at the pace at which the lessons have been generated, to be very candid. But let me step back. I think we use this word distributed renewable energy as a overarching label. But essentially, if you look at it, it can be seen as a system. It can be seen based on the use case either as a product, an appliance powered by DRE, or a project. And I think the problem in financing starts with that, because we put everything under the same bracket. And this has not been today. It is even when the government was the biggest market maker in DRE. In fact, till today, government has been the biggest market maker. The peak for DRE in this country, other than the rooftop, and we'll come to the rooftop in a bit, came in on the back of the Saubhagya scheme. That was the year when the maximum number of mini grids were installed, maximum number of solar home lighting systems were installed. Shortly thereafter, the whole market crashed. SHS market more or less disappeared because everything was electrified, at least theoretically. And we were never able to represent what this role of this DRE is. Very similar to the way, while pagers have continued to exist outside India, in India, we launched 3 technologies at the same time, fixed, pager, and the mobile. Nobody could understand what is a pager meant for. We never defined a use case and the contextual application. So when we are now looking at DRE, there is, of course, the most visible one is the rooftop. And rooftop always has had 2 variants to it. One has been multi-kilowatt systems, and then there have been sub-kilowatt systems, which was what was called the solar home lighting system, which is what Selco Foundation did, Simpa, and several others. And at one time, about 5 years back, that was the segment which was expected to be the beachhead for private capital to go in. It had the first strategic investments that happened. It had the first level of lenders coming in, whether it was the KFW line through IREDA, whether it was the DFC guaranteed line through RBL, all of that flew into that segment. So a lot of the conversation that was happening in the previous segment, and I suspect will happen here, actually that segment saw that opportunity and had that capital flow in, equity flow in. So it was not just the grants that went in. However, because the demand itself plateaued, and because you could never find a good way of reducing transaction costs, you could never get a single venture to be profitable. And the problem then was that as you increased economies of scale, the normal logic is you should bring down the price curve. You are actually requiring more and more equity to cover for the burn because the amount of capital you had to spend. And, so I think that is one. The learning there is socialization of the cost for DRE is extremely critical element. It has nothing to do with the product level viability. It is to do with the way in which the demand gets structured and presented. And I think that's what Saurabh was also alluding to in some way. The second part of this is the financing for products will work very differently than projects. No amount of aggregation will change that differentiation, because in one end you are likely to look at retail financing, and the other end you are likely to look at enterprise financing, whether working capital, asset financing, whatever. And the metrics are very different. The outlook is very different. The competitive landscape is very different. Today, you can get a DRE system finance for retail financing for as low as 6% in this country under the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund. We have done projects under that. On the other hand, we have 100 more projects stuck in that. And, and I can speak this because we are both an advisory arm, which does a lot of work, but also a financing arm, which is perhaps the first lender of its sort in this country, which have, we have invariably been the first lender to a lot of companies that, Dhillon was referencing, etc. And so we have some understanding. We still do not know what will succeed. We certainly know what will fail. That much, we have accumulated over 15 years. So I think where we go today, I think there are 3 big opportunity areas. I think Saurabh and the chair touched upon 2. One was the Kusum. Second is the new rooftop scheme, which has been approached. But I think there's a bigger one, which I think is closer and will allow for differentiation, which is the Green Energy Open Access Scheme. What will that do? While most people see it as that there will be a monolith power plant which will pump it in, more likely than not, for the distributed loads like telecom towers, you will end up having megawatt scale systems, but within that electricity circle. And the last mile that Kusum endeavored for in the Kusum A actually will go through that. And you will see a lot more, and you're already seeing, I think in the last 15 days, there have been about maybe 6 or 7 RFPs in that area. So there's an opportunity to go there and go forward. I think the other big opportunity is this whole cooling piece. We have been trying to create, in the post-harvest loss piece, the micro cold storage opportunity. The challenge there is the technology is there, a solution is there, but the demand, the awareness at the end user level is still extremely short. And so we are trying and going and selling a product which we learn from Maharashtra, and we are trying to sell it in UP. And very soon what happens is the customer there recognizes their use cases are different, and therefore the technology gets a bad light, and invariably the hit happens on the financing level. I personally believe, yes, you need viability gap funding to some extent for all these products to a certain point. But the only way you can bring them down, and even in case of MCS, we are actually working closely with EESL. We've been trying to nudge them for the last year or so, that we can aggregate a program of 3,000 storages annually for 4 years to change the narrative on that space. You can actually take the vibe on a very small program that we are doing right now with 200 of this over this year. We have already brought down the viability gap, at least for one kind of technology, by about 40%. So I think there's an opportunity there. And financing actually will be the last one to come on the table. And I think in a lighter note, perhaps that's why this session is the last one in the day, because normally financiers won't be the first ones to come. And I think we need to recognize that reality.
So we have been talking mostly of distributed RE of solar only. So what is your take for biomass projects coming up and financing of them?
It's interesting. You will have seen many more variants of the biomass applications come up. It started with mini grids. Dr. Sharan is here. That was the first mini grid in this country, actually, way back in 96. And perhaps a variant of that in 92 in Orcha in Jhansi. But today what we see is there are about 100 plus micro cold storages powered by biomass. In fact, that is the segment which is perhaps closest to viability if I look at it, and they are solving for the biomass in different ways. This biomass is being procured commercially and it is still viable, right? Just this morning we finished off a discussion with a very large group where we are trying to see if we could take over the entire cooling, the chilling competence across all their distribution backbone. So I think that's one area of biomass. The other one that you are seeing increasingly is that people are creating biomass as a fuel, right? And that opportunity is emerging also significantly. In the industrial setting, you're seeing, so it's not necessarily electricity, but the thermal utilization. And there the supply chains are still evolving, but you are seeing a significant amount of demand. And these are, many of them are actually suppliers to the global export value chains. And there is a vested interest for them to make this transition. And because many of them have either historically been coal-fired or other sources, the boilers have been all fossil fuel-led. So we are increasingly seeing that transition. Problem obviously with biomass, as you noticed, is that uncertainty of the supply chain. But there's been far more, I would say, awareness created. You are seeing pellets getting created out of plastics. There's an ex-Thermax gentleman who's doing this very, very successfully out of Pune. He has just also installed it in Ladakh. And it's interesting to see how that he has brought in the waste management systems in the city of Pune together, extracting this and converting that, and using the CPCB norms. Actually, it's very, in 2004, CPCB came up with a norm of how you could use plastics in an incineration situation. So you're seeing different kinds of, not a pure play biomass, but a combination of biomass and solid waste coming together. So you are seeing some of this play out. And I don't think solar by itself is a solution. You will see a blend of these in all these areas.
So now we come to Sabyasachi Majumdar, who is a senior director with Care Ratings. So we would like to hear his take on this financing of RE.
So first of all, I'd like to thank, PFI as well as CPI for giving us this opportunity to share our perspective on financing of distributed renewable energy projects. Now, let me be very frank upfront that as a rating agency, we have a very limited charter given to us. Our charter is to assess all entities who come to us for a rating purely on one parameter, which is basically creditworthiness. That is, if you are investing 100 rupees in a particular entity, whether you are going to get it paid back in time and with the due return on it on due dates. So we have a very limited charter. So frankly speaking, if someone was to ask me what rating agencies can do to facilitate investments, my honest answer will be that we are not mandated to, facilitate investments in a particular sector. Irrespective of whether we assign a rating of AAA or D, which is the highest or the lowest, you would, notice that our letter has a standard line that this rating is not a recommendation to buy, hold, or sell a security issued by the company. So clearly, that's not the mandate. But having said that, we do, have had a lot of learning. For instance, when I rated my first renewable energy company, of course, this is not distributed. This would still be conventional rating. Our rating assigned was, I think, BB minus or something, which is fairly deep into the non-investment grade. Now, even entities which are getting rated even before conclusion, they sometimes attract high category or even AA ratings. To that extent, we can say that with greater confidence and establishment of track record, we have become more positive on the renewable energy industry. But having said that, again, the fact is that globally our rating models, significantly, work to the advantage of established entities, entities with relative size of operations, entities with very well-defined management information systems where latest information is available, very, robust credit matrices such as debt service coverage ratios or interest coverage ratios. And it's very evident that many of the distributed, renewable energy companies, the entities rather, I should say, they would not perhaps score very high on any rating agencies' parameters. So the way out would be, I think already, suggestions have been made by Mr. Bhatt as well as Mr. Kumar and several others, that perhaps the best way to do is to see how, these individual small entities can be aggregated by large aggregators who are possibly backed either by the sovereign or very strong players who are in the either in the business of energy or any particular service. For instance, Mr. Bhatt mentioned here about, biomass players who are supplying to large corporates. So perhaps, if those large corporates which are going to source their energy in the form of biomass pellets from thousands of such small entities, perhaps, lending through them, these corporates, let's say, take the money and provide support to these entities. Perhaps, the benefit of, higher credit rating resulting in lower, capital cost can perhaps be transmitted to the, these small DRE players. There are other ways also where rating, in fact, I would say that, regulators and entities in the country, development agencies in the country have been proactive in using the core competence of rating agencies in developing, such kind of solutions. And happy to see Mr. Saurabh Kumar, who was one of the people who used such facility. He was, I think, heading Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and he initiated the process of ESCO gradings. They were trying to popularize, energy service companies to get access, because when they started operations, people didn't know who were the credible players who we should go to. So they started this pilot project of getting, ESCOs graded. These are not ratings. These are more like, performance or capability ratings and assignments. And it was quite successful. And later, other entities like, for instance, the MNRE, they started, grading for solar energy players, which are both RESCOs as well as system integrators. And they were so successful that even after, MNRE discontinued the process of gradings, we still used to get mandates from, these players. They used to say that there are many entities who still insist on getting a third-party certification. And even if there is no requirement for such certification, once we go to the market with our brochure which says we are rated 1A by CARE or CRISIL or ICRA or any of these rating agencies, it gives us a lot of acceptance in the market. So there are other ways also, although of course now SEBI has ensured that such, because with regulations that such products cannot be offered by the rating agency, but by their affiliates and subsidiaries. But then that is more about the legal fiction. There are various, but basically the core competence of the rating agencies can be used for, supporting such entities in a different sort of a way.
Sabyasachi, one area where the rating agencies could make a difference is also the manner in which these rating models are used by the public sector banks.
Right.
I'll give you an example. For the largest rooftop line in this country, there were two lines which were set up at the same time, one with SBI, one with PNB. In both cases, the risk models were not rating the RESCOs on the basis of their off-takers,
Right.
which are non-power sector companies. You were looking at the power sector performance and saying there is a challenge in this sector and therefore the bank should not lend. And to me, it was totally contrarian to the way you would apply to any other sector, because just because it's a distributed RE solution, you are bundling it under RE, where the off-taker was not the utility. So I think things like that is where some knowledge and awareness
definitely.
and
In fact,
perhaps even taking a little bit of risk is needed to do that.
So in fact, we have built similar. I mean, I was in a different rating agency then, but we did build, similar solutions for, IFC. They were, going for rooftop funding with one of the private sector, with one of the independent P-backed platforms. So we built solutions for them for assessing the viability and relative safety of such. So rating agencies have been involved with banks in building solutions for that, although they may not now be in the rating agency, but their affiliate arms.
So how much are the rating agencies sensitive to this climate change risk which are there, and how do you consider this in your methodology of rating maybe a company?
Yeah, that is, I think,
that is
yeah.
a factor
Yes.
which can bring in more means rating of a renewable energy company.
I'm glad you asked this question, and in fact, over the last 3-4 years, all rating agencies globally have been moving towards it. In fact, most rating agencies now, as a part of a rationale, when we introduce a para on the ESG risks. That how does a company fare on the ESG risks? What are the ESG risks which could impact the performance and viability of such entities? And gradually, many of those factors are gradually, I would not say we have completely, but definitely over a period of time, our rating models would include such, because the risk of, penal regulatory action, there could be a situation where your ability to conduct a business would be impacted if you're not able to score well on the ESG platform. So definitely, gradually, ESG considerations are getting, incorporated. We are very mindful of, what are the kind of negative impacts a particular company's operations has on the environment, and the other side also, like the climate change and other things, what kind of impact they are likely to have on the future cash flows of the company. We are getting more mindful of that. It's also likely that very shortly ESG rating will also be permitted by rating agencies. Globally, of course, there are ESG agencies, but possibly the rating agencies will also in India be getting into the ESG space. So yes, it's a developing area, and we are getting more and more mindful of the ESG considerations.
So coming back to Mr. Saurabh ji, so what are the various roles of philanthropic capital is playing in enabling energy transition worldwide? Can you throw some light on that?
Three or four very different roles across the value chain. First of all, enablement, institutional building, so technical assistance to governments, to other stakeholders to make sure there are right kind of projects that can absorb capital. So that's number one. Number two is viability gap. We've all talked about viability gap funding. That's again something we have been doing. Just to give you an example, we have just closed a battery energy storage project in Delhi, 40 megawatt hour. The tariff, you will be surprised, is 4.9 rupees per kilowatt hour, lowest in the country. Yes, we have used some concessionality. We have also used some technical assistance. And then any other form of capital, that's the flexibility of the capital that we possess, is that it can be used in any which way to create a market and have people like Upendra ji starting to invest in those projects. So that's what, in general, what we have been doing, pushing the DRE, battery storage, and other climate impact globally.
So GEAPP has, I think, a large corpus of capital. So how do you see it getting effectively channelized to the projects for clean energy?
So yes, we do have capital commitments of about $1.5 billion from three funders that we have: Rockefeller Foundation, IKEA, and Bezos Earth Fund. But let me mention, you came out with a number that India needs $10 trillion to transition to net zero. So clearly, it's not enough for any need. But the name GEAPP has a word alliance. We are an alliance of 20 partners globally, which includes the World Bank, the ADB. And basically, the idea behind GEAPP is to create an engine room, take over the risk using our capital, and let the others, the funders, whether it is an MDB or a DFI, to come in large respects and do this. Just half a second of what we have done in India in the electric mobility space. You may have heard that when Prime Minister Modi met President Biden in Washington, D.C. in June of last year, the joint statement talked about that US side will help India with 10,000 buses. So we are behind that. What we have been able to achieve after that and till now, and I must compliment the Ministry of Heavy Industry and the Government of India, they understood that while 135 million can put 10,000 buses on the road, that's not sustainable. And we told that ministry that look at the MNRE. What have they done by creating a SECI? You don't need any intervention thereafter. So I'm very happy to report that the decision has been taken where your promoted company EESL is being designated as the SECI for transport. While we are providing 150 million between us and the US government, the government of India will also add 350 million so that the pool becomes of 50,000 buses and goes on. So these are the kind of work that we want to do. And this program we are now replicating in Indonesia, Brazil, and Nigeria, because this has a value virtually everywhere in the world.
Coming to Upendra Bhatt ji, so many of the distributed RE technologies are losing out on economics to their counterpart, which are funded by fossil fuel. So how can a level playing field be created for the startup and their ability to access the capital market?
Well, I think, like I said, the starting point in this is to demystify where the delta is. Is it delta at an enterprise financing level or is it at a retail financing level? Because somebody is buying either that service or that product. And if we continue to keep it as one black box, you will never solve it. Because if you look at it today, let's take the case of rooftop solar. One of the use cases which has gone unnoticed but has picked up very significantly in the last 12 months is the solarization of the flour mills. if you drive, and it has been done by a microfinance company, which is the costliest form of capital that you can think of. But what they have done is they have tied up with a solar, and what was an erstwhile mini grid company to put out a solar solution, aggregate it, and offer it as a bundled solution for 5 years. So what happens is after 5 years, the system is yours. You are paying an EMI, which is tied up with a microfinance company, Fusion in this case, and that is now seeing a lot of replication in other states. This has been attempted previously also, but nobody aggregated it collectively, right? So I think coming back to the question, how do you create a level playing field? I think the level playing field, sir, can be only created with 3 simple parameters in my view. Number one is to recognize that the system has to create value, not for the provider, but for the user. And in several times, like any other technology, the technology guys have been pushing use cases which have no relevance on the ground, or it is far ahead of the awareness level. And so I think first thing would be to prioritize which of these use cases. You talked about a number of 12 technologies which are commercially viable, yes. But how much of that potential is recognized as demand? So let's, my favorite example again, microcools, because we have been putting a lot of money in that space over the last 2 years, is that for every 100 prospects that you meet, less than 5 are aware about a use case. Now, then you arrive at another filter, how many of those guys have a use case which is viable? Because when you talk of a delta, that is how you start looking at it, because there's no point talking about subsidies, concessional funding if the use case itself. And all these people want a payback between 3 to 4 years. Like every other entrepreneur in this country, big or small, nobody is looking, by and large, for a 10-year payback intervention. So when you are designing an intervention, in my view, you have to look at it from that point of view. And so that is where I would feel models like GEAPP have a relevance, because they could come in at scale and do the de-risking. In fact, they should not invest, in my view, at all on the assets. They should not invest on working capital. They should not invest on retail financing at all. Because if the perception is that these are riskier technologies, that is the only way you can get it out. And in fact, I would suggest not even try and get a interest subvention going. Let them just start getting X amount of units out there. Because unless that happens, people like Sabyasachi will never have the data to give comfort, even if Tata aggregates. Today, the largest rooftop solar provider is Tata. They have 23% of the market. But how many people recognize it? It is all sold through their distributors. Tata doesn't offer its balance sheet beyond maybe some supplier credit. So I think that fundamental shift is needed to make it workable. But you will have to break it down, again I repeat, between appliances, products and projects. 1. Number 2, retail and enterprise. 3, CapEx heavy and CapEx light. So I think unless we kind of slice and dice it, in case of the bus example that Saurabh was talking, it's easier, even though the private sector leads that segment, but the concentration can be done through the government entities. So it's easier to start and roll it. It's the same way the solar transition happened between 2010 and 2014, and then the market took over.
So I'll just respond to Mr. Bhatt. You rightly mentioned that use case is important, and essentially as rating agencies also we look at that. Now let's not talk about distributed. Let's begin with the conventional renewable energy. As I said, when I did my first renewable energy rating, they were selling power at more than 15 rupees. And my rating was BB minus. Now today also, if the tariff was 15 rupees for them to become viable, their rating would have been BB minus, maximum BB plus. The reason why I am confident to give them a rating of A category or maybe even AA at the very initial stage of the operation is because I recognize as rating agencies, we recognize the fact that they are offering something which stands on its own merit. I mean, which is competitive with respect to coal. Obviously, I understand that these are not apples, these are apples to orange comparison. Things like, that intermittency and others there, but it can stand on its own feet. So similarly to give, if there was a large aggregator, whether it was an MFI or a corporate which was offering, these kind of solutions, and they were to, let's say in the form of SPV, and they were to come to us for a rating, definitely would look at the sponsor, but at the same time, we would also, as a rating agency, look at the use case, whether the product or the service that they are offering offers a saving or any benefit which is quantifiable.
So I think we are at the end of the session. So I will throw the house open. If any participants want to have a question, they can ask the panelists.
Hi, I'm Sakshi. I'm from the Just Transition Research Center at IIT Kanpur. And although we have plenty of renewable energy capacity, right, but the generation is still quite low at 13-14%. So DRE being so small scale, how do we really expect it to produce enough power to make a significant difference to the overall generation? Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely bang on target. It's actually not even 13%, it's about less than 10%. And yes, that's one reason why, I mean, we have missed our renewables target, to be very honest. We were supposed to reach 175 or 200 gigawatts by 2022. We are still not there. So I think that's why, if you see the PM's announcement of the rooftop, that should add in the next 2 or 3 years 30 gigawatts. And this is at the consumption end will, and a lot of focus on distributed renewables is basically. One technical challenge that this country will face, like many others developed countries have faced, is the moment your renewables become about 20% of your energy mix, you cannot any longer absorb them unless you have flexibility in the grid. So there's a lot of work going on storage, energy storage, not just batteries, but also pump storage. New regulatory framework is coming up. And Mr. Sahai, who's sitting here as Secretary Power, has started off the whole aspect of the ancillary services market. So I think moving forward, you will see a much more absorptive capacity. This country needs 50 to 60 gigawatts of renewables every single year between now and 2070.
And also, apart from power, renewable energy would also get into other applications. For instance, let's look at compressed biogas. Although it strictly may not be that small to be under part, I mean, someone could argue that it's not DRE or that DRE, but there are other applications also, including industrial fuels. For instance, use of biomass pellets and other things for industrial fuels, or use of biomass for generating compressed biogas, green hydrogen, as and when, technology improves further. So there will be further areas. So if you're looking at all of that, we are looking at could be looking at large numbers. In fact, in CARE, we have our own internal projections. We do believe that with the capacities being added, possibly by 2030, about 40% of the total energy will be renewable plus hydro, which is not a small number. I mean, after all, it's not that we are going to get to 100% or net zero by 2030. So I think we are on the right target, and we should see it as, step in the right direction, rather than say that why we are only 13%.
And with so much rooftop coming in, I think the households will also go in for energy storage. Battery storage will be there. And with time of day tariffs coming in, then you will see more of storage being there to supply at the peak hours. And the factors, plant load factor and CUF, which you have mentioned, will increase further. Any other question, please?
One. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that was an interesting and informative discussion that we witnessed. Let us join our hands in thanking each of our eminent speakers who are present here on the dais with us. May I please request Mr. P.K. Singh, Senior Advisor, PFI, to kindly please present tokens of gratitude, acknowledgement, and respect from our side for each of our presenters. Thank you very much to our eminent panelists. सबसे पहले हमारे session chair, Mr. R.S. Dhillon. Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you for adding value to this session. बहुत बहुत आभार हमारे सभी panelists का, Mr. Saurabh Kumar, Mr. Upendra Bhatt, Mr. Sabyasachi Majumdar. This panel has shed light on the business case models for transformative potential of DRE in shaping electricity generation and consumption. Thank you very much. A group picture and post that we'll have the vote of thanks, ladies and gentlemen. They say that community is not just another stakeholder in the business, but the very purpose of existence of any enterprise. Taking on all these learnings forward and building on the work that has already been done. Thank you very much once again. In the end, may I please invite Dr. Sambit Basu, Head, Research, Power Foundation of India, to kindly please present the closing remarks.
Thank you. We had an extremely enriching session all through the day, and I'm deeply grateful, and I want to express my appreciation to all the session chairpersons, the panelists, as well as presenters, for their insights as well as sharing their experiences, which has only helped us in better understand this area and look deeper into it. So we will not say that we are ending this note in the end of the conference. We are only getting started, I must say, because what we'll do is that we have taken detailed notes of all the sessions, and we'll ultimately translate them into a conference paper or a conference compendium. We'll try to put together all the issues and as well as all the kind of suggestions and recommendations and which are there. And we'll also follow it up with some of the, in the form of a working paper series with, in collaboration with CPI, and we'll work together and we're just getting started. But having said that, I mean, although not go by session, but it would be useful to kind of just take away some of the key issues that were discussed right from the inaugural session, where DG Power Foundation mentioned about DRE's importance from the 3 E's in terms of the environment, efficiency, and equitous nature of them. And then it was kind of echoed by various other speakers in the latter sessions and subsequent sessions, which only kind of strengthened the view that it's absolutely essential from the energy transition point of view that we're talking about. We're talking about decarbonization. We're talking about a large section of the population. There's a huge energy poverty which exists. And given all of these, DRE becomes small is beautiful. But what Mr. Sharan brought in, I think Dr. Sharan brought in an important aspect that while small is beautiful, but given the issues, it is important that we look at the rigor of the big. So when you look at big projects, you take it through a rigorous process of viability in understanding who is the beneficiary, who brings in the supply. Although it is embedded, but there is a kind of a complete model around it. And there is no single solution, there is no single bullet, there is no one size fits all. It varies from one place to the other, but there are some common threads to each one of them. And that's that model aspect which kind of builds them together. And that throws up the rigor of carrying out DPRs, and ultimately, because this is where I bring in the other aspect which kind of resonated by every speaker in every session about financing. Because ultimately you have to convince the finances to come forward. And while proof of concepts have been done to a great extent by CSR programs, philanthropic funds, number of projects being shown as successful, and honesty of being failed also. But at the end of the day, it is important to understand that there are projects which are high on capital, high-risk projects with zero returns, high-risk projects with low returns, high-risk projects with medium returns, and high-risk projects with high returns. And at the end of the day, it is all about financing, getting them all. It's also about skilling. It's also about training, capacity building, and not just capacity building of users to understand the renewable energy in terms of their productive use. Renewable energy goes beyond just the light. You don't want your backyard to be technological graveyards, because you want it to be ultimately benefiting each one of them. And they are the solutions that we'll be providing. So I think we need to look at all of that. We need to look at how we can replicate them, scale them, and all this within the boundaries of the kind of various suggestions that were put forth. So with that, I will kind of close. I want to take this opportunity to thank some of the people over here. So I would first begin by thanking the guidance and support that we have received from our senior and top leadership, starting with DG Sir, Sanjeev Sahai, then our senior leaders, PK Singh Sir, Aarti Gupta Ma'am, Kalpana Ma'am, and also CPI senior leadership, Dhrubo. And I would do injustice if I do not thank for the hard work, tireless efforts that my colleagues have put together to put this conference in place. To begin with, from PFI, Manoj Mishra, Anurag Bhagat, Nikita Gupta, Dhanraj Reddy, Shashwat Datta, Oli Mitra, Umakant, and from CPI, Vivek Sen, Sarthak Khurana, Tariq Habib, Soma Tiwari, and of course, all other colleagues who have put together this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for that elaborate vote of thanks. I think you tried to cover everybody, and that's the best part, when we thank each of the people who are behind the program. In conclusion, as we navigate the distributed renewable energy pathway for sustainable development, let us remember that our journey is not merely about reaching a destination, but about collective effort, dedication, and unwavering commitment to actively participate in the transition to a low-carbon economy, fostering economic growth, job creation, and social equity while safeguarding the environment for future generations. Thank you once again, everyone, for attending this conference. Have a good evening ahead. Thank you.